Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're heading back to the very end of the Cretaceous, specifically looking at Catalonia in Spain.
Right. And our focus is a dinosaur called Adynomosaurus arcanus. It's known from, well, not a huge amount of fossil material.
Yeah, pretty limited stuff. But it turns out it's got a really interesting story to tell about dinosaur life in Europe just before, the big impact.
Exactly. Our main guide here is the 2019 paper by Prieto Marquez and colleagues. That's the one that formally named and described Adynomosaurus.
And we'll also sort of place it in the bigger picture of what was going on with dinosaurs in Europe back then.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say the mission for this deep dive is to figure out what makes this dinosaur special, what its discovery tells us about that specific time and place.
And why even, like you said, scant material can actually give us some pretty cool insights.
Okay, let's get into it. How did we even find out about this weak shoulder lizard? Where did it first pop up?
Well, the first find was back in 2012, and
Ah.
the location was maybe a bit unexpected, a wheat field in a village called Basters. Some local finds tipped off researchers.
From a wheat field, okay.
Yeah. So researchers from the Catalonia Institute of Paleontology and the local university, they did excavations there in 2012 and 2013.
Right. And what did they pull out of this field?
They found bones, but they were disarticulated.
Yep.
So not a complete skeleton all joined up.
Ah, okay. Scattered.
Scattered, yeah.
Yeah.
But definitely had Dualsaur, duck-billed dinosaur.
Mm-hmm.
They found bits of the lower jaw, the dentary, some vertebrae,
Uh-huh.
a left shoulder blade,
Mhm.
scapula, a left sternum, part of a rib, and then bits from the pelvis and the hind legs.
So a decent collection of parts, even if scattered.
Interestingly, they found 2 left tibious shin bones, which means the bones came from at least 2 different Adynomosaurus individuals.
Right, minimum of 2. So not a ton of bones overall, but enough to signal something new.
Exactly. Enough to start piecing together a picture. It really shows how paleontologists can work with fragments.
Fragments, yeah. And I heard there was like an initial guess about what these bones were before Adynomosaurus got its name.
That's right. In 2018, there was an abstract, sort of a preliminary announcement.
Okay.
And it suggested these might be a new species of Parahabdodon. That's another kind of plant-eating dinosaur from Europe.
Ah, so a different duckbill relative initially. So how did we get from Parahabdodon to Adynomosaurus?
Well, the official naming, Adynomosaurus arcanus, that came in the 2019 paper published in Cretaceous Research.
Okay.
Prieto Marquez and the team looked closely at the bones, especially that left scapula, the shoulder blade. They give it the specimen number, MCD 7125, and made it the holotype.
The holotype being the main example, the name bearer for the species.
Precisely, the definitive specimen.
And the name itself is pretty cool. Adynomosaurus, weak shoulder lizard. Tells you something right away.
It really does. Adynomosaurus comes from Greek words, adynamos for weak, omos for shoulder, and sauros for lizard.
So directly referencing that shoulder blade.
Yep, because it looks, well, underdeveloped compared to other hadrosaurs we know. And then the species name, Arcanus.
Arcanus, like arcane, secret.
Exactly, meaning secret or occult. That refers more to how patchy and incomplete the fossil record is for hadrosaurs in that part of Spain during that time. It's a bit of a mystery.
A secret lizard with a weak shoulder.
Got it.
Okay, let's dig into that anatomy. You mentioned the shoulder, but what about the rest of it? Was it typical hadrosaur?
In a lot of ways, yes. The vertebrae they found, the limb bones like the humerus, femur, tibia, they generally fit the hadrosaur mold.
So, big plant eater, walked on 4 legs mostly, but could probably rear up on 2.
Yeah, probably. Quadrupedal, capable of bipedal movement. Would have a beak for snipping off plants and those complex batteries of teeth in the back for grinding.
Like the classic hadrosaur setup.
And since it's classified as Lambeosaurine,
The ones with the head crests. Usually, yeah.
Yeah.
It likely had some kind of hollow cranial crest. We don't have the skull, unfortunately. But maybe something visually, a bit like the crest on Centosaurus. It's speculative, of course.
Okay. But you said there were peculiarities. Let's talk teeth. How were its teeth different from other Spanish hadrosaurs found nearby?
Yes, the teeth are interesting. So in Spain, from around that time, we also know Catalosaurus, Ourenosaurus, and Blastosaurus.
Okay.
Catalosaurus had tooth sockets, the alveoli, that were rotated slightly backwards.
Right.
Ourenosaurus and Blastosaurus, their sockets pointed more upwards, vertically.
And Adynomosaurus.
It's sort of in between. In the front of the jaw, the sockets are rotated a bit, but further back, they become more vertical.
Huh. An intermediate condition. What might that mean?
Well, it could suggest subtle differences in how they were eating. maybe processing slightly different plants or using slightly different chewing motions. Even within the same area, you might have niche partitioning.
Different specializations, even if small.
Interesting.
And the shape of the teeth themselves.
The crowns, the main grinding part of the tooth, they are quite tall compared to how wide they were. About 3 times taller than wide.
And how does that compare?
It's different from Tyrannosaurus and Blastosaurus. Their teeth were even taller and skinnier, proportionally.
So more variations suggesting different food preferences, perhaps?
Possibly, yeah. It points to a more complex picture than just hadrosaurs eating plants.
Okay, let's circle back to that shoulder, the namesake feature. What exactly is so underdeveloped or weak about the Adynomosaurus scapula?
Right, the scapula. It's really quite distinct. Proportionally, its overall length seems to be the shortest known for any hadrosaur.
The shortest. Wow.
Now, we have to be a bit careful because the fossils are incomplete, so getting an exact length is tricky.
Yeah.
But what's clear is the shape of the blade part.
The flat bit.
Yeah, the main flat, expanded part of the shoulder blade. In Adynomosaurus, its width is only about 75% of the width of the proximal end. That's the base where it connects the shoulder joint.
75%. And how does that compare to others?
In almost all other Lambeosaurines, that blade is either about the same width as the base or even wider.
So it's significantly narrower and maybe shorter overall. Could that just be because it was a young animal?
That's a good question, but the researchers look into that. Studies on how other hadrosaurs grow show that these particular proportions of the scapula don't really change much as the animal gets older.
Okay. So it's likely a real feature of the adult animal.
Seems that way, yes.
Yeah.
And it's even more striking when you compare it to other hadrosaurs from roughly the same time and place, like Perhapodon or another unnamed Lambeosaurine found nearby at Basser's Pobel. Their scapulae look much more, well, conventional.
So Adynomosaurus is really the odd one out with its shoulder.
Definitely stands out.
What might that have meant for the animal? A weaker shoulder, less powerful arms.
That's the inference, yeah. But comparing the bone shape to muscle attachment sites in modern crocodiles, which isn't a perfect comparison, but it's a starting point. The researchers suggested this probably meant weaker muscles involved in moving the humerus, the upper arm bone. Things like lifting the arm out to the side, pulling it in, rotating it.
So maybe less forceful arm movements?
Potentially. But, the paper is cautious. They stress we can't be absolutely certain that muscle size typically matched bone size in an extinct animal like this. It's a strong hypothesis, though.
Understood. A weaker arm structure, possibly. Anything else unusual in the bones they found, besides the shoulder and teeth?
Yes, a couple of things in the pelvis stood out. The ilium, the big upper hip bone. It has a crest over the hip socket, the supraacetabular crest. In Adynomosaurus, this crest has a distinct V shape, and it extends really far back, right to where the ilium connects with the ischium, the lower rear part of the hip.
And that's unusual.
It is for most Lambeosaurines. But interestingly, it's similar to what you see in Parasaurolophus cristatus, one of the short-crested Parasaurolophus species.
Wow, Parasaurolophus.
And also in another unnamed hadrosaur found nearby, from a place called Serrat del Corb.
Interesting connection there. Anything else shared with those two?
Yes, the ischium itself, the part of the ischium that connects to the ilium, the iliac process.
Okay.
It's quite similar in Adynomosaurus and those other two. The top and bottom edges are almost parallel. It's quite stout and has a broad surface where it joins the ilium.
So these shared pelvic features, could they hint at a closer relationship?
They might suggest some kind of connection, yeah. Though proving it definitively is tough. It adds another layer to the puzzle of where Adynomosaurus fits in the family tree.
Which brings us nicely to classification. It sounds like figuring out its exact spot on the hadrosaur family tree has been tricky.
Oh, absolutely. Very tricky. The original 2019 paper placed it within Lambeosaurine, the crested hadrosaurs.
Right.
But they couldn't pin down its relationships very precisely. Their analysis resulted in what's called a soft polytomy. Basically, a point on the family tree where several branches come off together, and you can't tell for sure which branched off first. Adynomosaurus ended up in this unresolved spot near the base of the Lambeosaurine branch, along with others like Erlosaurus, Canardia, Traxortosaurus, Syndosaurus, and even Perhapodon.
So kind of in a heap near the bottom of that branch.
Pretty much. But
Yeah.
as often happens in paleontology, that wasn't the final word.
The plot thickens again. What else has been suggested?
Well, other studies came along later with different analyses, different data sets. Some suggested Adynomosaurus might actually fall outside Lambeosaurine.
Really? Like
Yeah.
a more primitive hadrosaur.
Possibly a hadrosauroid, maybe closely related to an Asian genus called Meningosaurus, so branching off before the main Lambeosaurine group.
Okay, that's quite different.
Then others kept it within Lambeosaurium. One study even proposed a whole new group, a tribe called Adynomosaurine.
Adynomosaurine.
Yeah, grouping Adynomosaurus with other European Lambeosaurians like Adynosaurus and Blastosaurus, and even Ejnabia from Morocco.
Wow, linking Europe and North Africa.
And yet another study suggested it was closely related to Syndosaurus and Perhobdodon, putting them together in a group called Syntosaurini.
So basically, it's still very much up for debate.
Very much so. It really highlights how difficult it can be to classify extinct animals when you only have partial remains. Different analyses can give you different answers.
A perfect example of science in progress. Okay, let's zoom out from the bones and think about the world Adynomosaurus lived in. What was Catalonia like back then in the early Maastrichtian?
Right, the paleo environment. The fossils come from the Cox Formation, which is part of the larger Tremp group. Geologically, this area was part of the Ibero-Armorican island.
An island. Europe was broken up then.
Yeah, late Cretaceous Europe was mostly an archipelago. Ibero-Armorica was the biggest landmass. And we're talking early Maastrichtian, so maybe 70, 72 million years ago, right at the tail end of the Cretaceous.
And the environment itself.
The evidence points towards a diverse coastal estuary system. Think meandering rivers, muddy floodplains. We also have lots of hadrosaur footprints from the Tremp group, and the rocks therein suggest similar depositional conditions.
Coastal, so near the sea. Was it wet? Dry?
Looks like it was pretty wet. Studies on oxygen and carbon isotopes from dinosaur eggshells found in the region suggest a mean annual air temperature around 21 degrees Celsius.
So fairly warm and humid, maybe subtropical.
Probably something like that, yeah. And interestingly, more recent work suggests a really strong marine influence, even quite far inland.
Marine influence inland, how would that work? Tides.
Exactly. They found microfossils, tiny bits of marine red algae, and echinoderms, like sea urchin relatives mixed in with the river and mudflat sediments.
Wow.
The idea is that powerful tides could have pushed seawater and these marine organisms many kilometers up the river channels, maybe as far as 80 kilometers inland from the coast itself.
That's incredible. So Adynomosaurus was living in this mixed freshwater, saltwater, tide-dominated delta.
Seems like it. A really dynamic and perhaps unique kind of habitat for a large dinosaur.
Fascinating. Who else was living there? What other neighbors did Adynomosaurus have?
The fossil record shows a fair bit of diversity. There were ancient frogs, paleobatrachids, the type of side-necked turtle called polysternon, and quite a few crocodilomorphs, relatives of crocodiles. Maybe things like Alodeposuchus, Acinodon, Doratodon, Sabrisuchus, a real croc hotspot.
Lots of crocs. Any other dinosaurs?
Yes, and this is quite significant. They found remains of a rhabdodontid dinosaur called Perissactus.
Rhabdodontids. Weren't they more common earlier?
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
Finding one coexisting with a Lambeosaurine like Adynomosaurus in the early Maastrichtian is a bit unusual for this part of Europe. It ties into this big ecological change that was happening.
Ah, yes, you mentioned a faunal turnover. Tell us more about that. The Maastrichtian dinosaur turnover in Europe.
Right. Around the start of the Maastrichtian, maybe just before, there seems to have been a major ecological shift in southwestern Europe.
A shift how?
The herbivores that had been dominant before, certain types of titanosaurs, long-necked sauropods, those rhabdodontids we mentioned, and nodosaurids, a type of armored dinosaur, they seem to largely disappear from the record in this region.
They went extinct locally.
Or at least became much, much rarer, and they were replaced.
Replaced by?
Different types of titanosaurs took over, and crucially, Lambeosaurine hadrosaurs, like Adynomosaurus, appeared and became the dominant large herbivores.
So a changing of the guard among the big plant eaters. Why did this happen? Do we know?
That's the big question. Was it direct competition? Did the newly arriving hadrosaurs just outcompete the old guard?
Or maybe something else?
Or did environmental changes, maybe sea level fluctuations, climate shifts, changes in vegetation, create an opening that the hadrosaurs were perfectly adapted to exploit? It's still debated.
And the Conx Formation, where Adynomosaurus lived, is important for understanding this turnover.
Very important, because it seems to capture a moment during the transition. You have Adynomosaurus, a clear member of the new fauna, living alongside Perissactus, possibly a holdover from the old fauna. And you also find a titanosaur called Adynomosaurus in the same formation, which is considered typical of the post-turnover fauna.
So it's like a snapshot of ecological change and progress.
Exactly. It gives us a rare glimpse into that dynamic period. And finding Adynomosaurus there helps fill in the picture of these European hadrosaurs during this really crucial but still quite poorly understood time.
It really feels like Adynomosaurus landed right in the middle of a major ecological drama.
It certainly seems that way. Its discovery, even from limited bones, adds a vital data point to understanding how European ecosystems were restructuring themselves just before the end.
Okay, so let's try and sum this up. We have Adynomosaurus arcanus, the weak-shouldered secret lizard.
Yep.
A hadrosaur, specifically a Lambeosaurine, living in coastal Spain around 70-odd million years ago.
And a really interesting, tidally influenced estuary environment.
Right, and it stands out because of its teeth, which are sort of intermediate between other Spanish hadrosaurs.
And especially because of that uniquely underdeveloped shoulder blade.
Which might suggest weaker arm muscles, though that's still a hypothesis.
Correct. And its classification is still a bit messy, highlighting the challenges of working with incomplete fossils.
But its existence, right at that time and place, tells us a lot about the big Maastrichtian faunal turnover in Europe when hadrosaurs were rising to dominance.
Absolutely. It's a key player in understanding that final chapter of dinosaur evolution in Europe. It reminds us that even fragments can reveal unique adaptations and unlock parts of the bigger story.
It really does. Okay, final thought for everyone listening. Something to chew on.
Go for it.
Given that Adynomosaurus is known from such incomplete material, and we know the European late Cretaceous record is generally quite patchy, just how much dinosaur diversity from that time and place might still be completely unknown to us? How many other secret lizards might still be out there, buried? And if we found them, how could they totally change our understanding of how these ecosystems worked, and maybe even how the extinction event played out specifically in Europe?
That's a great question. There's potentially a huge amount still waiting to be discovered. Really makes you think.
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.